Welcome, 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 everybody. I'm Selena Rezvani, and you're joining Women and Work Culture. This is a live stream all about those positive habits and practices for making your workplace more inclusive to women, right? Because your business depends on it. I'm joined today by the awesome Shuchi Sharma. She's the global head of gender equality and intelligence at SAP. Welcome, Shuchi.
Thank you, Selena. Thanks so much for having me.
So excited to have you here today. And same goes for you, community. We want to hear where you are logging in from today and joining. So let us know in the comments. I already see South Florida, Tampa Bay, Delaware. So we've got some good range going. Shuchi, I want to tell people a little bit about you because I'm not the first person to say you have like a jealousy inducing job role. Such a cool job with such a neat focus. In Shuchi's role, she's working to move SAP towards their goal of moving more women into management. And she works on that at that rate of 1% per year, working on their target from 25% in 2017 to 30% women in management in 2022. So talk about a big, exciting goal. And she's doing that across 100,000 people. Shuchi oversees really neat programs like AMP, Activating Men for Parity, the Women's Professional Growth Series, as well as the Gender Equity Certification called EDGE that SAP is a part of. She's also my good friend. And we had the good luck. I had the good luck of meeting Shuchi a few years ago when we were both guests on a business radio show. And ever since, I have just huge admiration for you and really rely on your read on all things, inclusion. So pumped for our conversation today. And friends who are joining us from Philly, Connecticut, Chevy Chase, Maryland, nice to see you. Send us your questions for Shuchi. Whether it's about her own career journey or it's about some of these great initiatives she's running at SAP, let us know what you're wondering. So, Shuchi, I want to dig into your role with you a little bit. You have worn many different exciting hats, right? You've trained in science, you've been a management consultant, you've been a business technologist. How did you get into gender equality? How did you bring all those together around this passion you have?
Well, Selena, that is a big question. I will say that my career has probably been a bit more of a zigzag or finding my way through the labyrinth versus climbing the ladder per se. I started my career in public health and studied public health management and policy after many years in the science area. And what I saw there was all of the inequity that women and children face to access to healthcare, right? This inequity is woven through so many institutions of our society. And that exposure gave me great understanding and appreciation for how entrenched that inequity is in our world today. And so when I moved into the corporate arena, I saw the same bias throughout organizations woven through their processes and systems, and really thought, okay, how do we address this? So I started an organization dedicated to women's leadership development, bringing women together from many, many industries and nationalities. And the common thread was so many of the challenges we were facing together. I thought, well, how can we just really act as change agents and multipliers to drive internal organizational change wherever we are, whether we're starting our own business and working in a certain ecosystem or working in a company?
That's awesome. Wow. Add that to the many hats that you've already worn, both the public health lens and the women's leadership one. I know one of the things we both get fired up about, Shuchi, is women and negotiation. That's something we talked about early days. I have to just ask you about your role. Was it kind of out there advertised, or is it something you proposed? That here's a great new idea.
My role was actually created in the organization about 5 years prior to my stepping into it. And I had an amazing predecessor, Nicole McCabe, who really started us on that journey around women in leadership. And the opportunity arose when she decided to make a transition as in, however, the role does sit in our global diversity and inclusion office at SAP. And um, the focus, though, remains the same around women in leadership, but has really evolved to look at the entire career journey of an individual and how we can make that more inclusive, underpinned by, how do we look at processes and ensure that we are making them fair for all, removing bias where we can, uh, and driving that strategic transformation through the organization.
That's great to know. And I think a lot of people are curious about this because gender equality is not a static thing, right? Do you see your role trending, evolving in a certain direction? I know you just touched on it, but tell us a little bit more about the ways, the directions it's headed.
I think the entire space of diversity and inclusion is really evolving in that way, as it should, right? For many years, we focused on diversity because we needed to ensure we increased the diversity in the organization. But as we did, we're thinking, well, how do we maintain that and really leverage all the value from it? And that is to ensure that the diversity is really included in the organization in a way that leverages its full potential. So in my role, I always did look at processes and strategy, um, and the entire culture. And what we have done is really transform the way we look at all the pillars of diversity to focus more on inclusion and looking at it from a more systematic and structural perspective, rather than population, because ultimately you have to build in change for scale and sustainability. And that is, I think, the challenge we as professionals always face. How do we scale what we are trying to change in an organization? And
Yeah.
how do we make it last?
Right. And it makes sense that it's harder to scale when you're operating in more siloed thinking, let's say, when it's this initiative next to this inclusion initiative. So I like the idea of some of those lines dissolving. So we're not tackling inclusion one way for women, one way for another group, but that
Exactly.
it's coming together. Well, SAP is known for being very progressive, and I think, partly having your role there in the first place shows a lot. I want to hear, some of the ways you are advancing women specifically. I think a lot of people are curious because you all are really on the forefront.
We're doing a lot, and I think as we look at the career journey, there's many different aspects to focus on, right? So we're looking at, okay, how do we hire more inclusively? How do we ensure that we're developing our talent intersectionally in the organization? And then how do we ensure that the organization is promoting and progressing those individuals so that we have more equal representation? Um, we're inspired by looking at new ways of working. So looking at models around co-leadership in some geographies, finding more ways to have flexible work models, uh, and then of course, how do we think about inclusion and help our leaders drive inclusion across the organization through their own behaviors, through their models of leadership as well? So that's something we are trying to embed into our organizations and really empower our leaders with those behaviors, whether they be sponsorship behaviors or acts of inclusion, or just how you lead differently in order to ensure that you bring all the voices to the table.
I love that. And I especially love that you all are looking at it from kind of the whole life cycle of the employee. not just hiring, not just developing, because as we know, some organizations can do well at one of those things, but they
Right.
may be faltering somewhere else. So I love that you see it really comprehensively. And I think a lot of us can take note of that as we think about inclusion. You have such a special culture there at SAP. If you had to speak to maybe one element of the culture that's positive for women, that boosts women, what would you say that is?
I would say there are several very positive aspects of our culture. We certainly have a ways to go in terms of reaching our targets, but the culture that we have engendered is certainly one of respect, mutual respect, accountability, and also flexibility, which is one of the things I think underpins us being able to ensure that we attract and retain female talent and underrepresented minorities into the organization.
That's huge, flexibility, right? But also the mutual respect piece, right? Sometimes it's hard to take flexibility if it's a benefit or if it's an option, if you don't feel like you can maintain the respect people have for you, right? And I know one of the slogans going around a lot of organizations has been to leave loudly. Leave loudly. Like, don't sneak out and end your day. Tell
Yes,
people I'm flexing. I'm stopping kind of my day to go live and be part of other parts of my life. Tell us a little more about the flexibility. Would you give us a flavor of how you like to approach it at SAP?
well, certainly. And I think many organizations are finding themselves in the same situation right now due to the COVID-19 situation. However, at SAP, for the roles that are available to be flexible, many of us work remotely. The company has empowered us with strong technology tools that enable this kind of dialogue all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And, some of that remote work certainly can be considered a double-edged sword. One has to actively set different boundaries in order to maintain their own sanity, certainly. And this massive shift we're seeing into remote work is is certainly fascinating from many perspectives. But we have flexible work guidelines for all of our managers that they can use to work with their employees to very tangibly say, okay, well, what aspects of your role can we make more flexible? And there are many, many different ways to make a role flexible that we try to empower our leaders to help their employees define for the success not only of the individual, but of collectively of the organization. And so far, that is working quite well.
That's awesome. I think a lot of employees would love to be asked, how can I make your work more flexible? That right there just shows, I think, an openness to thinking creatively, to thinking kind of expansively. There's not one way to do this. Lots of people supporting what you're saying, saying they love flexible work models, the idea of not sneaking out the door at 5, but doing
Right.
so comfortably. You did get a really great question from somebody, which is how you get men on board with reducing gender inequality at SAP.
At SAP, we're very fortunate. When we certified with the EDGE organization, we did a survey of all of our employees worldwide. And what we found was that probably about 80, I don't remember the exact figure, but it was mid 80% of our population. So let's just say 84, 85, all felt that gender equity was critical to our um, business advantages. So I'm not finding the right word, but I think I know what I mean here. So
Mm-hmm.
critical to our compelling ability to be a market player in the space that we serve, our customers we serve. So that alone tells you that there is, a large support for gender equity in the organization. The challenges are that we know that the will is there. Now we have to really make that happen by embedding the principles of inclusion into all the parts of our employee journey and life cycle. How do we work with our suppliers and ecosystem? And then how do we embed it into all aspects of our culture?
That's awesome, and I think just very inspiring for those organizations who aren't quite as far along in their thinking.
There's two more areas I can add to that, Selena,
Yeah.
to that specific question, if it's helpful. One is we're working to empower our male leaders. So we have a program called Activating Men for Parity, and
Mhm.
we lead cohorts of male leaders in dialogue, really about what is privilege, what is unconscious bias, how do we define inclusion and lead more inclusively in our meetings in a virtual setting. And then the second area is paternity leave. We've led a global campaign to increase our paternity leave adoption, and in many cases shift our policies as well to encourage more men to take paternity leave, because what we find is, and what we know in lots of data from our Nordic partners, is that uh, long term, that really removes a lot of the pre-existing beliefs and conditions around entrenched gender roles, which helps long term
That's
define gender
beautiful.
equity in the workplace.
That's so exciting. And it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It's kind of the whole ecosystem of a family unit you're talking about, and you're impacting them positively by promoting that paternity leave. At the end of the show, you all will see in the show notes a great article on SAP's website that the road to gender equality is paved with paternity leave. And I love that. It is so provocative. You're getting lots of shout outs and love for that practice. So, Shuchi, we're talking about flexibility in part and the importance of that. I know you have two girls. You have this, you know, really important job at a high performance organization. How do you yourself set boundaries?
Well, I'm wondering what my family would answer right now. I will tell you, it is certainly a struggle, right? And I think so many of us are doubly impacted right now in the COVID-19 situation. I know, Selena, you and I were talking about that. The burden of home educating is now falling on women, plus all of our other responsibilities, and we're working at the same time. So I feel like every day brings new challenges, but what I do try to do is ensure that I have some time in the morning to just sort of reset myself. And then dinner time is sacred. And I love the term leaving loudly. One of the ways that I committed to promoting gender equity on my own before I was even in this role was to, leave the workplace if I had a ballet performance to attend or a soccer game I needed to get to, right? Because I was bent on demonstrating that my performance would not suffer if I would still prioritize my family. And I think that those things are important to do and to be pretty loud about and unapologetic about. So I try to, so yeah, try to keep dinner time sacred, and then let my family know that I'm available during different points of the day. Um, and so far, that's okay, but could always be better, right?
Yeah, it is so ongoing, I think. Our desire to get better at it and to be present in one place, in one activity, or task at a time, because it's really
Right.
easy to try to push them together and do many things at once. And I think some people are relating to that, as we see, in some of the comments. And so I want to just encourage those listening based on Shuchi's great piece of advice. I wrote something down. You said, the morning is your time to reset yourself. For all of you listening, what is that time for you? What is your reset yourself time? I think half of it is identifying what it is so that you can
Right.
you can do it more often.
And I will tell you, it sounds simple, and it certainly is, but sometimes hard to implement. But it is so important. I have learned through my own journey with my health. When I first took a global role, I would get up in the morning and immediately move from bed to computer and start working very, very early. And then I would do the same thing after dinner. And that really took a toll after a while. So setting those careful boundaries and then respecting the boundaries of others as well, is always been a solid principle and value for me. But it makes a difference because this is certainly a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah, 100%. And you're never kind of finished, right? You're
Right.
always working on it. Um, I think that's really helpful for all of us to know. I want to ask you about something you touched on earlier that I'm really passionate about and excited about, and frankly, something I wish I saw in more companies. And it's when you talked about co-leadership or job sharing. And I wondered if you could tell us more about that very cool program.
So this is a really interesting concept that we're beginning to try out in our offices in Germany. And the way this works is that, for example, Selena, let's say you and I identify a job where we want to co-lead and it's available as a co-leadership model. We can together apply for this job. And then, through all of the aspects of the role that are high fidelity, deliver this role together and split the time, but still coordinate it so that it is seamless delivery and very easy for others to work with us. And we're just starting out on this journey in our organization. It's exciting. I think there's going to be a lot to learn from it. And, every journey starts with a step. So while we are just getting started, I am so excited about the potential that exists ahead because as we experiment with different models of leadership and job sharing and co-work, we are going to learn so much because the workplace is no longer about one single individual being the breadwinner. The workplace is about working families today. And that is what we need to think about going forward.
I'm so happy to hear that. I love that people saying, I wish every company were as progressive as SAP and, lauding some of what we've learned from Nordic countries as well. And how it seems like some of those practices are finding their way into SAP's work. I want to, first of all, co leadership just seems so smart. It seems so smart. When I run surveys with companies, one of the items that can rank low among women is the question, a leadership role here is compatible with work life balance. And I love that you're creating a channel, to maybe change some of those opinions for those that hold them. So I love it. You all have been a very quantitative organization. You've been really transparent about numbers. It's part of your charge in your role, numbers. Are there ways you help take that articulated number and translate it to success, translate it to action?
Absolutely, Selena. And I will say first and foremost, your introduction was so kind, but to that very question and point, this work is done by a very large ecosystem in our organization that I partner very closely with. And there are a couple different things which really impact and critical for our success here. One is that we have very strong senior sponsorship from the top levels of our organization. So while they make the targets, they also support them and talk about them. And then second, I work very closely with a full extended network of D&I professionals in our company. And all of them are mobilizing our leaders and managers to reach these goals through dedicated action plans. And these amazing people are what are also driving change in the company. And then last, it is looking at our policies and changing our policies to be more inclusive and using diverse personas to underpin how we design new policies to make some of this change more long lasting and to be in service of individuals that they may not have included in the past.
So awesome. I think we're all learning and taking notes here. I love that you're approaching it on multiple levels, from the D&I evangelist in your organization to the very practical action plans, to the vocal leadership. So it makes it clear how, inclusion could really take root when you're working at all those levels. I want to ask you, given the massive shifts you referred to earlier, what are some of the questions you're asking about the future of work right now?
There is so much to think about, so much I've been thinking about. We've seen entire organizations have to shift overnight to remote work, and what we are going to learn from the impact of that, I think, is going to be phenomenal in terms of how we reshape work in the future. And it's going to create so much opportunity. What I'm thinking about is how do people experience their organizations now that remote work for so many companies, especially in the technology space, has just shifted to this remote setting. How do we experience diversity in our organization? And I don't know that I have all the answers, Selena, but these are definitely things I've been thinking about. There's really interesting studies going on. There's a Chinese travel company that did a great experiment of keeping part of their workforce remote and part of their workforce in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found over time was that the people who worked remotely were far more productive. And what was also interesting, though, is that they had lower rates of promotion because they were less visible. So these are all really interesting data sets that are going to help us think about how do we ensure that we remain focused on inclusion as the landscape of how we work and how we connect shifts. And we're so interconnected now, and our work is becoming more network focused versus hierarchical. So that's going to change a lot of the way we behave in the workplace, because you don't need to know everything anymore, right? You don't want to be that person who knows everything. Information is so distributed. So I know that was a lot of
No,
information I just shared, but there's a lot to think about, right?
it is a lot, and I appreciate you asking those questions. I think questions are enough, sometimes to just get people, sparking new ideas or thinking about the things that we all live with every day, but we kind of stop seeing. We stop noticing. And so it's interesting. We've had some guests on who've talked about the fact that, technology may be allowing them to reach more people with a D&I message. And I myself, I find myself asking the question, could, are there some really positive ways we could leverage technology? In a room where we're all sitting together, we can't always easily measure who's talking the most, right? Or who's
Right.
not talking, or who's getting talked over or interrupted. And it seems like technology could play a kind of cool role there in making that more visible, maybe more transparent.
Absolutely. There's a really interesting organization we're partnering right now called Atypica, or sorry, that was a different one, but Cultivate. And they help us understand how our managers interact with their employees. And are they interacting with our employees equitably given the time they have and where their employees are? So lots of interesting opportunities to leverage technology to advance inclusion in the workplace, for sure.
That's awesome. And you're right at the front lines of it. In the last moments we have, I would love to zoom out the lens a little bit, Shuchi, and get you thinking big picture about your legacy and some of the legacy of the work you're doing for working women. What's most important to you when it comes to making an impact?
I am so inspired, Selena, by the, what women are able to do when given more access to networks, opportunities, and resources. And, I always am guided by the example of Stand Up to Cancer, where how Katie Couric really, as a female, entered this domain of research and changed how we do medical research by just bringing a different perspective. And I think creating opportunities where women can come into an area where they may not have had access, bring a different lens, and inspire innovation and change is really the lasting legacy of all of us who do this work. And that is what inspires me every day to keep doing this work, is the unlimited potential that I know so many women and underrepresented minorities have to bring to the betterment of our society.
That's awesome. Beautifully said. Well, Shuchi, I think it says a lot about you that you've, dedicated this role and your career to gender inclusion and bettering work. And I think it's clear that you're helping those inside SAP, but also with forums like this, you're helping, other organizations do better today than they did yesterday. So thank you for all you do, and being just an awesome champion. You'll see links, everybody, in the show notes to be able to follow Shuchi here on LinkedIn, but also to see some of the great interviews and the great articles on SAP. So look out for those, check them out. And I hope you'll stay in touch with me also. Check out my LinkedIn learning courses so you have the confidence to set those boundaries, right? To leave loudly, as we talked about today. I hope you'll join my newsletter tribe and that you'll follow me here on LinkedIn. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shuchi. Stay healthy, stay
Thank
well.
you. Thank you so much for having me, Selena. Always a pleasure to spend time with you.
You too. And lead on, everybody.